Thank you everybody for joining us today. This is going to be part one of our DIY PR project. I want to welcome and thank Rebecca Epstein. She is the founder of 15 Media. It's a boutique PR firm specializing in media relations. And with that, I'm gonna go ahead and let you take it.
Hi everyone, thanks for being here today on this nice chilly morning, which is so crazy to say and so exciting to say just because it's been so hot here in Central Texas, if that's where you're located. I am excited to be with you for the next hour and a half or so to kind of give you effective and actionable strategies to get your business the media attention it deserves. As was just mentioned, this is part one of a four-part series. So today we're going to kind of go over why you need PR, how to make sure your brand is ready for PR, and then where to look for story ideas. You know, what topics should you be pitching the media? So I will go ahead and dive in. A few things before I kind of get started that I wanted to mention is please make sure you're on mute throughout this presentation just so we don't pick up the background noise on the recording. And then also I will leave about 10-15 minutes at the end to answer any questions that you have. So feel free as we're kind of going through, if you're having any questions, to leave them in the chat box. And then at the end, I will kind of answer all of them at once. And one other thing I wanted to mention really quickly is that you were sent a link to a Google Drive last night and this morning. I would recommend having that open because I'm going to go through some of the worksheets that are in there. And then also we might have a few minutes to kind of give you time to sort of work through some of the questions or brainstorming activities. So if you didn't see the email, well, you obviously did because you're here on the Zoom link and the link was in there. But I also shared that Google Drive link in the chat, so you can just click it that way as well. But yeah, that's kind of all of the housekeeping items, and now we're gonna jump right in. So I just wanted to give you a little bit more information about me so you kind of know who's going to be chatting with you over this next hour or so. My name's Rebecca Epstein, and as was just mentioned, I own a boutique PR firm here in Austin called 15 Media. My PR firm only specializes in one thing, which is media relations. So all I do all day is reach out to the media and try to figure out how to get my clients coverage in those different outlets. What makes me a little bit different than your typical PR firm is that I actually don't usually work with clients directly. My clients are actually other PR firms. And so what happens is all of these other PR firms from across the country hire me to be what I like to call a ghost publicist. So I'm behind the scenes getting their clients the media attention, and then they turn around to their clients and show them all the great articles or TV segments that they've received. And so this has kind of given me a unique position because since I've worked with so many PR firms, I've really been able to see what works and what doesn't when it comes to media relations. So these are kind of some of the places that my clients have been featured in. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the tactics and the steps that I've used to get my clients media attention in these types of publications. So as I previously mentioned, I've not only worked with all these PR firms and seen kind of what works and what doesn't work. I've also, just worked with so many different types of clients over the last 10 years or so. And I sort of boiled down all of my knowledge into what I like to call the open method. And these are 4 steps that you can use to break through the crowded email inboxes of media outlets. And so today in this presentation, since this is part one, we're only going to go through that first step, which is observe media trends. And then the rest of the presentations are going to go through those next other 3 steps. So I hope that you can join us for the 4 parts so you kind of get all of the different information that you need. But as you can see, the first step is observing those media trends and figuring out what story you should be pitching the media. Step 2, which is what we're going to cover in 2 weeks, is pinpointing media contacts. In step 2, that's where I show you how to use resources that you already have access to, such as Google and LinkedIn, to find the media outlets that you want to pitch for your business. And then step 3, which is in October, is how to actually write the email pitches that you send the media. And then the last step, step 4, which is towards the end of October, is where we will talk about how to follow up without annoying the media, and then just how to be a constant resource for the media so they keep coming back to you over and over again. So before we kind of dive into actual PR, I really want to talk about branding for a little bit. And the reason why this is really important is that your brand is a tool. When you send an email to the local TV station or when you send an email to the newspaper, um, you really, they're going to look you up. They're going to look at your website. They're going to look kind of through your social media. They're going to see what you have to offer. And you really want to make sure that your branding is concise before you do any of that. And that's why it's really important to kind of go through this next branding exercise that I have, because it helps you to make sure that your brand is concise. And so when you reach out to the media, all of it makes sense and they understand really quickly what your business has to offer, why you do what you do, all of these things. So if you go to that Google Drive that I mentioned before, in there is a worksheet called Branding Evaluation. You can see it right here. I should have it on my screen. And over the next few minutes, we're kind of going to workshop through this document. I'm actually planning to give you a few minutes where you can work on it yourself, because I know as myself being a small business owner, at the end of the day, you set aside time to be here at this presentation, and then after this presentation, you have, a million other things you need to get through today. And so chances are you probably won't necessarily have the time to come back to this document. So I do, with these worksheets, want to set aside a few minutes for you to actually brainstorm your own business, think about, what makes sense for your business. So when you leave this presentation, you actually have all the tools that you need. You're not having to go back later on and think through them. So this is the branding evaluation document that I do during all of my presentations. Here is just some more information about why your brand is so important. Things to keep in mind, and you probably already know a lot of this, but your brand is so much more than just a color palette, a font family, and a vision statement, even though those are all very important to your brand. Your brand is really the tool that catches the right people's attention, the people that will actually buy your product or hire you for your service. It really communicates your value and creates a sense of urgency for your customers and the media to take action. So this kind of activity is important, as I mentioned, not only for your customers, but also for the media, because this is the first thing that they're going to see when you reach out to them via email. Through these exercises, I really hope that you can hone in on your brand and sharpen it to cut through the noise. So we'll do this by working through what I like to call our brand triangle. We'll start it's almost an upside down triangle, because we start with the broadest sense of your brand, and then we'll narrow it down to your elevator pitch, or what I like to call your brand summary. After you work through these exercises, you should really feel confident about talking about your brand, not only with potential customers, but also with the media. So as I mentioned, here's what I like to call my brand triangle. It's an upside down triangle. So we're going to start with a 3 words activity. We're going to go into your dream customer, and then we're going to end with your elevator pitch, which is just kind of the 3 or 4 sentences that summarize your entire brand and get people's attention really quickly. So the first step of this is your 3 words. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to mention about all these worksheets is that they actually, if you click them, you can type right there. So as we're kind of talking through some of these things, you could just type your brainstorming activities right as we're talking. So I always, when I'm going through these branding activities, I always like to start with 3 words. And the reason for this is I want you to pick 3 words that you feel like describe your brand, describe the, feeling your brand, describe what you want to convey with your brand, whatever it might be. And the reason that I recommend starting sort of in this broadest sense where you pick these 3 words is that every time you do something for your brand, you can ask yourself, okay, does this make sense for these 3 words? So for example, I'm going to kind of go through this activity with you and use words that describe my own brand. So the first word I like to use is actionable. Everything that I do, I like to make sure that it's actionable. Whether it's when I'm working with my PR firm clients directly, I want to make sure that what I'm doing is actionable and I get them results. Or when I'm doing these workshops, I really want you to leave with actionable things that you can do. I don't just want you to leave and say, oh yeah, that was all good information, but I don't necessarily know what to do next. So that word to me is like the #1 word of my business. Another word is easy to understand. I guess that's kind of a phrase, not a word. But another thing is I try to really break everything down to make it super easy to understand. Whether that's my blog post or my social media or even these presentations, is I try to give you these tools that you already have access to, that you already know how to use, that are easy to understand. Um, and the other kind of phrase or word that I like to keep in mind when I'm doing this branding activity for my own business is not too seriously. Is I don't take my brand too seriously. I feel like there's a lot of PR people out there who really, take their jobs as life or death. And at the end of the day, nothing that we're doing is really life or death. And so I always try to pride myself on kind of being a fun brand and just not really taking yourself too seriously. So those are sort of my 3 words or phrases for 15 media. And they can really, for your business, depending on what you do, they can be anything. I've seen people use words such as like handcrafted, welcoming is another big one that I see people use over and over again. Scientific, if that kind of fits the field or industry that you're in. Research-based or evidence-based is another big one. So it really kind of depends on the type of business you have and the industry you're in to kind of determine what your 3 words are going to be. And the reason I recommend that you write them down on this document is that as you're doing anything, you can go back to it. So, for example, as I'm sharing a post on social media, I probably would always think to myself, okay, is this post actionable? Is it easy to understand? Is it not too serious? And it's kind of a checklist for me to go through as I'm doing things. Or as I'm writing a blog post, I would go back to this. Or, it really, anything you do in relations to your brand can go back to these 3 words. Like even when I decide, whether or not I want to do a speaking opportunity like this, I kind of go back to this and say, okay, does it fit these criteria? And so I think it's just important to kind of have a baseline for these types of things, because as a small business owner, you're doing so much. You're going to have to do your email marketing, you're doing your PR, you're doing all of these different things. And so it can be hard to make sure that you're being concise and that you're staying on track with these different things. So I really hope that you'll kind of start by writing out these 3 words that make the most sense for your brand. So the next thing, after you sort of figure out what your 3 words are, and I can kind of you can kind of be writing this in as we're going, and I can pause and give you a few minutes if this is something that you want to do. But after you sort of figure out what your 3 words are, the next thing you really want to do is figure out your customer. I work with a lot of small businesses, and I find that, as a small business owner, obviously you want to sell your product or you want to have people, buy your services. But at the end of the day, not everyone is going to be your dream customer. And so it's much more important to kind of have a dream customer in mind and make sure that everything that you're doing targets that dream customer, then try to be the end all be all for everyone. Because if you try to market to everyone, then you're never gonna show your dream customer why you're the best. And so I really recommend that this is important, again, not only for PR, but also for anything you do for your business. It's important for PR because it's really gonna help you come up with the media outlets that you want to send your information to. Because you want to make sure that you're targeting media outlets that have the same audience as you have. And so that's why it's really important to pinpoint a dream customer and then make sure that every kind of marketing thing that you do, you stick to that. And what I always recommend is, yes, you could have more than one dream customer, but I really, really would not recommend having more than 2 or 3. Because then again, it just gets too confusing and you never know what to do because you're trying to market to everyone. And so you never really hone in on your messaging or you never really hone in on your brand. And so I really recommend that you sort of, if you haven't done something like this already, I feel like this is sort of a typical branding thing if you've ever hired a branding coach or worked with any type of marketing agency. If you haven't already, I really recommend that you kind of hone in on your dream customer and really create a persona for them. You can even kind of put a name on them and say, okay, my dream customer is Jessica and Bob. Here are the different things that they do. And then it kind of gives you a person, a real life person to keep in mind when you're reaching out to, not only media contacts, but when you're also doing, email marketing or advertising or whatever it might be. But in terms of PR, you can always ask yourself, okay, would my dream customer, Jessica, read this publication? If so, let me reach out to them. Or is this a good publication media outlet that Bob would reach out to? If so, let me, reach out to them. So that's why it's really helpful. So again, I'm going to kind of workshop through this with you. So my hope is that you're kind of writing down the notes for your business as we're going through this. So for me, my personal business for 15 Media, I sort of have two dream customers. The first one is the PR firm owner. So that is kind of who I market my actual pitching services to. And then my other dream customer they're small business owners like everyone on this presentation, because that is who I market my DIY PR services to. So the first question I always ask is, where do they work? So for me, PR firm owner, they're obviously going to work at a PR firm. And then the second one, which is small business owners like all of you, they can really work anywhere, but it still gives me enough parameters to know who I need to reach out to when I'm reaching out to media publications, or when I'm reaching out to organizations for potential speaking gigs. So that is really important to kind of know where they work and what they do. And then another thing that is also really helpful of this and how it ties back into PR is that it kind of gives you media outlets to reach out to. So because I know PR firm owners is sort of my dream customer, well, then I can look up media outlets that the audience is PR firm owners. Or for my DIY PR workshops, I really want to target entrepreneurs and small business owners, so I can look for media outlets that the audience is comprised of those people. So another thing to keep in mind, and again, the reason that some of these questions, they might seem silly, or they might not seem relevant to your business, but I do recommend kind of answering some of them, because it gives you an idea of who your customer is. It really gives you an actual person to keep in mind. So another question is, what do they do for fun? And so I feel like because of the pandemic, this question might not be the same, because obviously all of our lives have changed and we probably can't necessarily do the same things that we used to do for fun. But I think for kind of my customers is I think the things they do for fun are give back to their community. Especially, as a small business owner, you probably do some type of philanthropy, or you have some type of philanthropic mission. Another thing that I imagine all of my dream customers doing is traveling. Of course, that's probably changed nowadays, but I do kind of think of my dream customers as, really traveling, getting out there, seeing the world. And so even, though this question might necessarily tie in exactly to your services, it helps you again to put a realistic person in your head. And then also you could even target publications under this question. So maybe I'll figure out a way to pitch my PR services to travel publications, or maybe I'll find a timely hook there, or maybe I'll, figure out how to pitch my PR services to philanthropy type publication. So again, it just kind of gives you that real life person to keep in your mind. So the next question is, do they live in an urban, suburban, or rural area? So for me, I would say that both of my customer sets, both of kind of my customer avatars, I really imagine them to be living in an urban or suburban area. But again, depending on what kind of your business you have, maybe it's really targeted to people who live in more rural areas. So the thing with that is that when I'm, again, looking for media outlets to reach out to, I can say, oh, well, they really live in this urban area, so let me look and see if there's a newspaper in that area, or let me look and see if there's podcasts in that area. So for me, it's really urban and suburban, but I'm sure there's people out there, who are in that rural area as well. So it's just kind of something to keep in mind, because it helps you narrow down those publications. So what does their personal life look like? So this is an interesting one. Because for me, a lot of the PR firm owners I work for example, a lot of them are women. A lot of them, are married and have children. And then for the small business owners, it's a little bit different because they can kind of be all over the place. But the point of this question is, again, so you can not only help create a realistic avatar in your head that you go back to over and over again when you're asking, like, does this make sense for my brand? But also it can give you more media outlets to pitch. So for example, if your kind of branding app, your customer avatar is a mom or is a single person or a married person or whatever it is, there are publications that target those kind of people. So even though, again, I'm hoping that you use this customer profile in a larger sense, not only for your PR outreach, but just to go back to every time you're having to make a decision for your business and every time you're wondering if that makes sense. But also, again, it gives you kind of outlets to reach out to. So, for example, maybe I would reach out to parenting outlets and figure out how to fit myself into those because I know that a lot of the customers I go after are parents. So, it's important to kind of think about these things. And the last question in this, customer profile, and probably honestly one of the more important questions on here, is what are their biggest challenges? And I would even recommend adding to that, how do you help solve them? So for me, what I would say, and this is just these examples, I'm just using my own business to kind of give you an example of what that would look like. For me, with the PR firm owners, they just don't have enough time to do the media outreach. They're doing a million other things. And so someone like me who's dedicated to that one part of the process is really helpful for them. And so the timing thing is something that I'm constantly talking about when I'm speaking to them, whether through ads or through blog posts, or even when I'm reaching out to new potential clients. And for small business owners, the biggest challenges for you all guys, and I would assume this is the reason that you're here today, is that you need to do PR. You have a million things on your to-do list as a small business owner. You might not be at a place where you can make the investment into a PR firm because it can cost, thousands of dollars a month. And so you're really hoping to be able to learn some actionable tools that you can take and you can reach out to the media on your own. And so, knowing the challenges of your dream customers is just really important because you can constantly, no matter what you're putting out there in the world, you can go back and show how you can solve those dilemmas or how you can solve those challenges. Even when it comes to PR, as we're going to talk about in a few minutes, is these ideas of what you pitch the media and what story ideas you pitch. And a lot of them will have to do with the challenges of your customers. Because then your goal is to show, okay, well, these are the challenges my customers have, but here is how I solve them. And so working through this is just really important, and you'll use a lot of this information later. So kind of the last thing that I would like to go over in this branding activity is your brand summary, which could also be known as your elevator pitch. It's just a brief summary. I don't recommend it being more than 2 to 3 sentences about what your brand does, what sets you apart, and why people should go with you over all the other brands out there. So it is really important to kind of think about this before reaching out to the media, because once you kind of have your brand summary written, you actually will use it in your PR pitches later. So when you send an email to the media with information about what you're pitching, you will use your brand summary because you want to include a few sentences about your brand. And so having it already written just saves you time because you just copy and paste it into your email pitches. It's also really good to have something like this. So when you're talking to potential clients or potential investors, or just when you're talking to anyone, I feel like nowadays, especially, we all just have such a short attention span. And so it's really important to be able to talk about your brand concisely and really nail it on the head about why your brand is unique. So when I talk about my brand, some of the things that I always talk about are, we're a boutique media relations firm. I talk about how we don't do anything else but media relations. I don't do social media. I don't do anything like that. I only do that media relations. And the reason for that is that I'm hoping it really sets me up as an expert, as someone that really knows what they're doing in this one field. And another thing that I always talk about when I'm sort of doing my branding summary is that I provide effective and actionable tips for small business owners to do their own PR and get the media attention that they deserve. And something that I would kind of like to say when you're talking about your branding summary, and again, it shouldn't be more than, 2 to 3 sentences, maybe 4 if you have to include it in there. But the first sentence of that branding summary can kind of be an overall, general summary of what you do. So it could be something like, I'm small business X and we make soy candles, or whatever it might be. So that would be the sort of the first sentence, is just kind of an overarching general summary of the brand. Then the next sentence in your brand summary should include just more information about you. If you have a service-based business, that next sentence should really credential you. It should say, oh, my method is different than everything else out there, or it could talk about your education or your training. If you're a product-based business, that second sentence of your brand summary can talk more about how you make your products, what ingredients you use, just really anything that kind of sets you apart or makes you unique. And in the last sentence of your brand summary, I really recommend including kind of a summary sentence. This is what makes me unique. This is what makes me different than everyone else out there. And then if you can just have those 3 sentences, you have a brand summary that you can use not only when talking with anyone about your business, but you can also use in your email pitches later on in the presentation. So those are kind of the 3 things that I really recommend that you deep dive into before you reach out to the media, just to make sure everything's concise and you have everything streamlined before you reach out. Just because, keep in mind, you really do only have that one first impression. And so you want to make sure everything looks good and people know right away kind of what you do or what services you have to offer. So that's the branding evaluation activity. And now we will go kind of back to the slides right here. So now that I've talked about branding evaluations and kind of why your brand needs to be in tip-top shape before reaching out to the media, I want to kind of go over what PR is. What does the phrase public relations actually mean? Because a lot of times when I'm meeting, small business owners or entrepreneurs, PR is just kind of one of those things that's on their list. It's on their list with email marketing and, content marketing and blog posts and all of these different things. But a lot of times people that I talk to don't actually really understand what PR is or how it works. And so the best thing about PR is that it's an inexpensive way to build credibility while getting the word out there about your brand. So it builds credibility from the sense that a third-party media outlet, someone that's not part of your brand, is kind of giving you their seal of approval. So if you have a product-based business and you're included in a gift guide or a product roundup, the publication is in a sense saying, oh, we thought this was cool enough or legitimate enough to include in this roundup. So it's kind of giving you that third-party credentialing. And this is really important, not only when the media placement comes out, but also I really recommend that once you sort of start accumulating these media placements, you put them on your website, because it shows, oh, so-and-so. I mean, how many times have you looked at a website and said, oh, wow, this person has been in the Austin American Statesman, or, as seen in the New York Times or CNN or Forbes or whatever it is. And you thought, oh, wow, this business is legitimate. They must know what they're doing to get this kind of media coverage. And so it really builds credibility for you and your business. And then, of course, the second part of all of this is one of the reasons that, most people think of PR is that it gets the word out there. It exposes you to a new audience, the audience of the media outlet. And so it kind of has those 2 benefits. And one thing I would really like to add in here, that one of the benefits that a lot of people don't necessarily think about with PR, especially nowadays, because more and more of the media placements are mostly online, a lot of the print publications don't necessarily exist anymore, is that the more places that your business is mentioned and linked back to, the more the benefits you get for SEO as well. And so that's something to just keep in mind as well, is that if you really want to focus on online publications, it can really help with your SEO. And that's sort of a change that I've seen over the last few years. Is I have a lot of people that just hire me now to do link backs for them. So those are kind of the three main things that I would think are the benefits of PR and why small business owners should really do it. So unlike advertising or unlike social media, where it's you as the business behind the messaging. And so obviously customers know that if you're going to pay $1,000 for an ad in the Austin American Statesman, then you're going to, you own that space and you're going to talk about how awesome your business is. So, customers can see through that. They can see that, obviously you're behind the messaging. So you're going to, toot your own horn. You're not going to put anything negative or anything like that. Whereas again, as I mentioned before, PR, because it is earned media, PR kind of gives you that third party credentialing because most of the time you're not paying for it. Of course, there's always exceptions to the rules, and there are a lot of kind of pay to play opportunities now. But what I'm going to talk about in this presentation is just earned media. And so that kind of ties into why this is a really inexpensive way to get the word out there about your brand, is that all you're really going to invest in this is your time to kind of find the media contacts or figure out what, newspapers or TV stations that you want to reach out to. And then also you're going to have to invest your time in writing out the email to send to those. But it's really just an investment of time. There's no necessarily cost associated with that, because when you write your email pitch to the media, you're asking, oh, can you cover my brand for free? It's an earned media placement. You're not paying for that space. So, if you took your time to write that email and find the media contacts and you really got a great placement, you basically got all that publicity for no charge. So that's why, especially for small business owners, I think PR is so important, especially when you're first starting out or you maybe don't have a big marketing budget. This is a really good route to go. One thing I will say is that since this is earned media, there are no guarantees. So you could reach out to a media outlet and not necessarily hear back, or they might not have a fit at that moment for your product or for your services. Or sometimes things come up and unfortunately, the story has to get cut. So there are some kind of negative sides to the earned media, but I just don't think those are worth not reaching out at all. So those are kind of something to keep in mind and really understand, what PR is before you start reaching out to the media. So two other things I kind of want to talk about just as sort of housekeeping before we go on is that I want to talk about two words that I already will say over and over again. I've already said them a bunch just kind of in the last 30 minutes or so. So I'll say media 100 times throughout this presentation, I'm sure. Good thing this is not a drinking game, because it would not be a good one, because I say media so much. And when I say media, I'm talking about all types of publications. So anything that I talk about in this presentation, you can really apply to all these types of media, outlets such as TV, radio, magazines, newspapers, blogs, podcasts, online outlets, whatever it is. All of the tips I'm giving are applicable to all of them. And something that I will say is that if you come back in 2 weeks for the second part of the presentation, I will break down the different types of media outlets and kind of give you a few tidbits of, what you should be pitching TV versus, what does well in magazines. So if you're interested in that, I would recommend coming back in 2 weeks. But anything that I'm talking about today in this presentation can be used for all those types of media. The other thing I will say over and over again in this presentation is pitch. And a pitch is just the email that you send to the media contact, suggesting a new story or putting your brand on their radar. And it's always done by an email first. There's really not that much to writing your pitch, but that is what I'll cover in week 3 of this workshop. But just so you know, because it all ultimately ties together, and I'm still going to be kind of talking about pitches. And when I say that, I'm just talking about the email that you send to the media contacts. So there are a few PR specific things that you need to think about before you start reaching out to the media. And the reason for this is that once you start reaching out, hopefully the media is interested in your business, and then things are going to move pretty quickly. They might need images right away, or they might need additional information. And so it's really good to kind of have all of your ducks in a row before you reach out, just because if media is on a tight turnaround or a tight deadline, you don't want to miss the opportunity because you didn't have all of the assets available. So if you go back to that Google Drive, I have something in there called the Are You Ready PR Workbook. And the Are You Ready PR checklist has kind of everything that I recommend that you have specifically for PR before you reach out to the media. And so you can kind of go through this and you can actually check these boxes as you're kind of putting all of this together. But these are just the things that I really think are super important to have in place before you even send any email pitches. The first one is, do you have an actual product or service? So you might think, of course I do. Why am I here taking this presentation if I don't have anything? But you would be surprised at how many times I talk to people who take this presentation and they only have an idea, or they're in the process of creating their products or putting together their services. And I really recommend not reaching out to the media until it's go time, until you actually have something to sell. Another thing to keep in mind is that you really need good images. And so if you're a service-based business or an expert like a wellness coach, a nutritionist, a doctor, someone like that, you obviously want to have a really good headshot of you because they might use that in an article. But if you're a product-based business, I always recommend that you have pictures of your products with white backgrounds, and have a low-res one and a high-res version. The high-res version should be 300 DPI, and so it's really important to have those products on a white background because, say, for example, you're included in a product roundup or a gift guide, then they're just going to put your product with all the other products, and if it's on a white background, then everything looks uniform. So you don't want to kind of have those staged lifestyle pictures. One thing I will say is, and again, this is pre-pandemic, I'm not sure how this is working nowadays, but if you have a product-based business and you don't have those pictures on a white background, you could always take your products to like Picture People or JCPenney Picture Studio in the mall, and they'll actually take them on a white background. So if you're kind of in a pinch and you don't have a photographer or someone that you like to work with, that's always something that you could do to kind of get some pictures taken quickly. So another thing that you want to keep in mind before you reach out to the media is does your website have enough information? And so here are the 3 things that I really recommend that you have on your website. What you do, that should be the first thing that comes up on your website, is a kind of a summary of what you do. And I think sometimes as small business owners, we get really close to our brand, so we just assume that everyone understands it. But you want to make sure it's very clear what you do, because this is really the first place that the media is going to look, when they're deciding if they want to include you in a story or do a feature on you. You really want to have your products and services listed somewhere clearly on the website. Again, if you're a product-based business, I just always have to throw this in because I've seen this happen, is you want to make sure you have actual pictures of your products. I've seen people use stock images before, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, you want to actually showcase what you do and what you put all your hard work into. You also want to have kind of an about page, which leads us into the next bullet point. A lot of times the background story of your business, especially as small business owners, there is a reason you do what you do. It's not easy to be a small business owner. It's not easy to be an entrepreneur. And there is something that really motivates you to kind of wake up every morning and put up with all the stuff that we kind of have to put up with. And so you should really reflect that in your about page, why you do what you do. Because I think that kind of helps personalize your brand. It kind of gives something for people to remember. Whereas, say, for example, you're a candle business, there's a lot of candle businesses out there, so it may not be that memorable, but your backstory could be something that people really relate to. And so I really recommend taking some time to have an about page before you reach out to the media. Another thing to keep in mind, and this depends again on what kind of business you are, but you have to be able to give the media samples. So if you have products, the media will ask for samples, and that's a charge or cost that you're going to have to incur. You're going to have to give them the samples for free. and then also pay for the shipping. And depending on what kind of service-based business you are, it really depends. But, you know, say for example, you own a boutique fitness studio, the media person or the media contact might want to come in and try a class for free. So just be ready for that request and know that depending on what kind of business you have, it is probably a cost that you're going to have to incur. And you can't, if you have products that you're sending out, don't expect for them to come back. Sometimes the media will send them back, but just don't expect for it. So can you make time for PR? This is another thing that's important to keep in mind as a small business owner. You know, you will need to set aside a little bit of time to actually make this happen. You can't just send out a pitch one week and then forget about it and never send out another pitch. My recommendation is really to spend an hour on PR a week. And I know you'll probably have a million other things on your calendar. So finding an hour might be tricky, but I would really recommend doing something PR related for an hour a week. So is your branding consistent? We already kind of went through that with the branding evaluation. You just want to make sure everything that you put out there looks like it's coming from the same company. Just because chances are the media will do a little bit of Google sleuthing about you before deciding to cover you or use you as a resource. Do you have a plan for an uptick in sales? So this is just something to keep in mind, that if you are getting media consistently, you know, you're getting media placements consistently, you might see, you hopefully will see kind of an uptick in sales. And so you just want to make sure that you have a plan for that, because if someone, you know, buys your product or orders your services for the first time and they don't necessarily have a good experience, you know, you don't want that first impression to be bad. So it's just something to keep in mind. And then the other thing is, are you really ready to get the word out there? It can be scary reaching out to the media. I mean, I 100% understand. And so you really have to be ready to put yourself out there and get the word out there about your business. So it's worthwhile to kind of think about that. So those are kind of the checklists you want to go through before you even start writing anything or, you know, reaching out to the media at all. So now we're going to dive into step one of kind of those 4 steps of my open method that I previously talked about. So in this first step, we're going to talk about observing media trends, because I truly believe, you know, before you do anything else, you need to figure out what story idea you're going to send the media. And so you really want to look at what media has covered in the past to get an idea of what they've covered in the future. So for the rest of the presentation today, I'm going to go through all of the places that you can look for story ideas. So ideally, you always have something new to pitch the media. Like I mentioned before, you know, you want to spend an hour, ideally an hour a week on this. So you're not going to be able to pitch the same story idea over and over again. You're going to want to constantly be looking for new story ideas or new things to pitch the media. So one thing I want to talk about really quickly before we dive into this is back to your Google Drive. There is, there is another document that might be helpful as we go through all of this. It's a brainstorming document. I don't know if you're anything like me, but sometimes I just love to brain dump everything out so then I can just have it all in one place. And so as we're kind of talking about the different places to look for story ideas, I would really recommend that if something's applicable to you and your business, you write it down or you write down your ideas. So then, you know, after this presentation, when you're actually writing your pitches and sending your emails to the media, you can look back at this document and say, oh yeah, I did pitch this seasonal story idea. So let me now pitch a leadership story idea. And this will make more sense as we go on. But this document is just kind of a place for you to start writing down those ideas as we go through the next few slides. So before we talk about specific story ideas, I really want you to keep this in mind before you pitch anything to the media. So you always want to ask yourself, are you adding value? Since this is earned media, then, you know, since you're not paying for the space, you're not buying an advertisement, the media doesn't care about trying to give you publicity. Their goal is not to, you know, give you media attention. Their goal is to really bring useful, valuable information to their audience so that they can come back over and over again. So that's just something to keep in mind a little bit, is that as you're coming up with your story ideas or your tie-ins for the media, you want to make sure that you're giving the media value, since this is earned media, not paying for it. You want to make sure that you're not just saying, here's my brand, now figure out a way to cover it. Instead, you're kind of squeezing your brand into valuable information that the media outlet's audience would really like, so then that hopefully they come back to the media outlet over and over again. So the first place to look for story ideas is what I like to call new news. And I feel like when people think about PR or reaching out to the media, this is really the one that they think about. You always want to let the media know when you have something new to share, and this can look like a variety of different things. But what I would say is, even I run into this when I'm working with the PR firms, is that you're not going to have new news all the time. You're not going to have new products. You're not going to be launching new services all the time. And so the reality is, this category of story idea is probably what you're going to be pitching the least. However, when you do have something new and exciting to share, you definitely want to let the media know. So here are examples of what new news story ideas might look like. And again, this is where I really recommend using that worksheet that I just mentioned to you, because as we're going through these, you might say like, oh yeah, I do have a launch coming up, or I do have, a virtual event coming up. Let me write that down so I remember to send a pitch out about that. So the first one, these are all the different kinds of categories that fall into new news, is any type of launches. So this can be a product launch, a new service launch, a new location, really anything that is new or you're adding to your brand, you should let the media know about. Another thing that falls in this category is any type of collaborations. And I feel like you probably see this a lot, depending on what industry you're in. The first one that pops in my mind is usually fashion, because there's always some type of new collaboration where one brand is partnering with another brand to create a collaboration, or maybe you're in the food business and you're partnering with another restaurant to create a collaboration. So those types of things are what you want to let the media know about. The next one that falls into this category are any new locations. So if you are a brick and mortar business, always let the media know when you've opened a new location, because they usually do cover things like this. And then even if you're not necessarily a brick and mortar business open to the public, but maybe you bought an office, or again, maybe people aren't doing that nowadays because of the pandemic, you can let the media know, because a lot of times they will cover it. For example, if you're familiar with Community Impact, which is that newspaper that comes to all the different kind of neighborhoods in the Austin metropolitan area, they always, that first section of the paper that comes every month is just dedicated to kind of these types of announcements. Events is another really good thing to let the media know about. And I get now that most of them are virtual nowadays, but you should still let the media know, because I still see people covering kind of these virtual events. And another thing you should always let the media know about, if it's applicable to your business, is business upgrades. And this can be things like new leadership, maybe someone gets promoted, maybe your business is acquiring another business. Whatever it is that's kind of making your business bigger and better, you should let the media know. And one thing I keep in mind as we kind of continue, through this, is that you're not going to pitch all of these things at one time. The point of this presentation is to give you unlimited story ideas that you can kind of pitch for months, honestly, and then kind of just so you always have something to pitch. So definitely, you're not going to pitch like launch collaborations and new events, all are events in one pitch. You're going to kind of, if you have something applicable for the launch category, send that pitch out, and then in a few months, if you're doing an event, kind of send that pitch out. So just keep in mind that you're not going to include all of these categories in one email. So that's kind of the first thing, is new news. Feel good. This is another thing to keep in mind that the media loves to cover. They love feel good news stories, which might be surprising to you, because it definitely always seems like the media is covering, bad news or sad news. But in reality, I have a lot of success with kind of feel good stories. Here are some examples of what feel-good stories might look like for you and your business. Business inspiration. I kind of talked about this during the Are You Ready for PR worksheet, workbook thing. But a lot of times, if you have kind of a feel-good story behind your business, maybe something unfortunately kind of tragic happened to you and that's why you started your business, or maybe you just thought there was a void in the industry and that's why you started your business. Those can kind of make really good stories for media. Another thing to keep in mind is any type of charity. And of course, this could look like a lot of different things. Is maybe your business as a team is volunteering somewhere, or maybe you're doing proceeds of a certain product that go back to a charity, or whatever it is. I feel like people get a little bit weird about this one because you're doing charity work and you don't necessarily want to publicize it, or can feel kind of self-serving to send the email pitch to the media contact. But the reality is, think of it this way, is not only are you getting publicity, but whatever charity you're partnering with would also get publicity. And so at the end of the day, since you're partnering with them, you probably think highly of them. And so it could do wonders for them getting their name out there as well. Another thing to keep in mind is any type of success stories. Maybe the clients you're working with are having, such success with your product, or it's changed their life in some way. This could also make a good story for the media. What comes to mind for this one is usually medical related. It's not always, but it's just off the top of my head, medical related, any type of success with procedures. That can be a really good success story. Or maybe you could talk about how companies have used your service and they've grown their sales by, X, Y, and Z numbers. Whatever it is, these can kind of always make really good stories for the media. Seasonal. So out of all of the different story ideas that I'm showing you today, seasonal is really where I pitch the most. This is kind of where I would say probably 98% of your pitching efforts will come from. It's also easiest to kind of figure out your story ideas within this category. So a winning PR strategy is when you pitch your products or services to fit into what the media is already planning to publish. And so what I mean by this is, that the media is probably going to do a Father's Day gift guide, or they're going to do stories about Thanksgiving. For example, I was working on this yesterday. I already had some people reach out to me about, I work with a lot of doctors, and so we're doing a lot of like Halloween safety tips, or things, will trick-or-treating happen? Is there a way to make it safe this year? Or even now I'm starting to get requests for Thanksgiving, like, is it safe to kind of meet with family on Thanksgiving? And so you want to kind of anticipate what the media is going to cover, and then figure out how you can kind of put yourself into those story ideas. And so anything seasonal or holiday related, there's a good chance that the media is going to cover it. So here are kind of some examples of what that might look like. So here are examples of kind of these seasonal story ideas. So more traditional holidays. So things like Halloween, Mother's Day, Father's Day, 4th of July, the holidays in December, that's a huge time to get media coverage. And so any types of those holidays, if you have something that you can provide your expertise to talk about them, or you can, have products that fit for the holidays, you definitely want to send them out, because like I said, if the media outlet covered Mother's Day last year, chances are they're going to cover it again this year. Marketing holidays, or what I like to call kind of those fake holidays. And you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about National Cheese Pizza Day, National Margarita Day, really anything. And I promise you, no matter what industry you're in, there's a fake marketing holiday for you. And you just kind of have to find it and do that research, and then sort of insert yourself into the conversation. But I think that's why I pitch so much around these seasonal holidays, is because there's just so many of them. There's always something that you can kind of peg yourself to. So it gives you unlimited amount of topics to pitch to. Awareness events are another really big one. So for example, October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month, doing a lot of pitching around that for some of the clients I work for. So always look up kind of those awareness weeks. I will say most of them are somehow medical related, but they're always a good opportunity to kind of plug you and your business into the conversation. And then actual seasons. So this is things like, this is obviously fall, winter, spring, stuff like that. And people are always working on those trend pieces if it makes sense for your brand. So maybe you're a fashion business, so you can send out a piece about, fall fashion trends, and here are the clothes that make sense for that. Or if you're a skincare business, fall skincare trends. So really you can kind of peg yourself into all of those. I would say that depending on the type of business, there might not be holidays or seasons that are applicable. So definitely make sure you're fitting yourself into ones that make sense for you and your business. And now if you want to go back to that Google Drive, I actually have a calendar that's created for you with a lot of those holidays. One thing I will keep in mind is that this is a 2020 calendar, and as we're getting towards the end of the year and into 2021, I would double check those dates. So, just because in January 2021, the 23rd was National Pie Day or the 24th is National Green Juice Day, it doesn't mean it's going to be the exact same date in 2021. So I would just kind of recommend doing your own Google search before you pitch any of these, just to double check that the date is right and that the date's the same for next year. But this is broken down by month, and it has tons of story ideas or tons of holidays, both those more traditional holidays and then also those sort of fake marketing holidays. And then I also, on the bottom of a lot of these, I try to include those health awareness related holidays. So, I mean, as you can see right now, we're in September, so maybe some of these make sense for your brand. If you have a podcast, you could pitch International Podcast Day. And then as we go into October, these might be a good fit for your brand. So all of this information is in that Google Drive for you to reference and kind of see what makes sense for you. If you want, one thing I recommend is kind of going through this, and then on that brainstorming document that I previously showed you, you can kind of write down the different holidays or seasons or events that make sense for you and your brand. So the next category is current events. There's always breaking news. There's always things happening. And so there's always, I would say, an opportunity for you to kind of contribute to the conversation. The good thing about breaking news, which hopefully I personally think it's a good thing, but for you, if you've never done media, it can be a little nerve-wracking, is that most of the time breaking news happens very quickly. So it could be a really quick opportunity for you to get a media placement, which is great, because some of the other categories that I've talked about here, they are can sometimes take a little bit longer to actually see that media placement. But for breaking news and current events, people want to talk about it now. So say, for example, you pitch yourself to a TV station to talk about something happening in your community, then they'll probably have you on pretty quickly. So I definitely would always recommend looking at current events and kind of seeing how you can contribute to the conversation. You know what I'm talking about is that there's always kind of that talking head on TV or quote in the newspaper that's kind of talking about, oh, here's how this, and this impacts the community, or here's why this isn't really a good decision to make. And so this category is talking about how you can really become that resource and you can kind of become that talking head. One thing I would keep in mind is that you pitch yourself nationally, so you can pitch yourself to kind of national outlets with your expertise. But also, if things are happening nationally, then you can kind of pitch yourself to the local media as well and say, oh, I'm an Austin-based entrepreneur, and this new piece of legislation is impacting me in this way. I would love to come on and talk about it. So you can kind of pitch yourself to talk about things happening nationally and how they are impacting you here locally, wherever you're based. So here are current events ideas for you and places to look. And one thing I would recommend, that if you are pitching yourself to talk about current events or news that's happening right now, time is of the essence. You don't want to sit on it for too long, because if you don't pitch right away, then chances are the publication will already move on to another story tomorrow. So you definitely want to make sure that if you kind of hear of something happening or are aware of something happening, that you really let the media know kind of right away. Oh, I'm here. I can talk about this. Let me know if you're looking for a resource or an expert. So here are some types of things to keep in mind when it comes to current events. So any type of breaking news, any type of news in general. And so I'll give you an example of something that I have been working on a lot is like I said, I work with a lot of doctors and a lot of pediatricians. And so what we've been doing is pitching them a lot to talk about um, opening the schools and what people need to keep in mind to keep their kids healthy and safe and all this stuff. And so if there's kind of those conversations that you can talk about, definitely let the media know. Anything, again, it can be like legislation that affects small businesses. You talk about how it impacts that. Like another example I'll use, I like using my real world client example so then you can kind of picture yourself in the situation, is I work for a CBD brand. And so anytime the hemp legislation changes in their state, we pitch them as someone that can talk about this. And it doesn't only necessarily have to be political. It can really be anything that's kind of happening that you can kind of insert yourself into the conversation. I feel like political things are just an easy thing to keep in mind. Another thing that you can keep in mind when it comes to current events is any type of studies. So again, this can really apply to the medical industry, but when, a new journal comes out with a study, you can kind of talk about how it impacts you, or maybe your trade publications in your industry come out with a study and you can kind of say, oh, well, I can talk about how this study impacts me and my business. Anything like that, any type of new information that comes out of your industry can be really helpful and can kind of position you as an expert. Trends are another really good thing, and this again is industry trends. And as we kind of go into the new year or end this year, this is going to be a really big one that I know I'm going to be pitching. And so these are kind of examples of what that looks like. So for example, right now, for a lot of my clients, for a lot of the small business clients that I'm working with, we're pitching Q4 trends. So this year has been crazy. We all know it. Some businesses have, really taken a hit. Some businesses are thriving, and it really depends. And so right now, for example, I'm sending out a pitch about restaurant trends for Q4. Like, what will the fourth quarter look like for them? And I'm offering someone that I work with as an expert. I also work with a real estate broker, and so I'm offering her as an expert to talk about what trends we think we're going to see as this crazy year ends. And so depending on what industry you're in, you can kind of think about that too and position yourself as an expert to talk about these things. Another example of this would be as we go into 2021, all of the trend stories you're going to be seeing about what are the trends in education, what are the trends in technology. Again, depending on what business you're in, that can be a really good thing to pitch, are these trend stories. And it just shows that you're really an industry leader and that you really know what you're talking about when it comes to your business and industry. Expert advice is a really good thing to pitch the media. The media loves to publish information based on firsthand experiences. So use this to your advantage. And this is really where you establish yourself as a thought leader. So if you have a service-based industry, you already are a thought leader. But if you have a product-based business, a lot of people that I talk to that are more in the products area, they don't think of themselves necessarily as a thought leader, but you are a thought leader. Whatever you do every single day, you are an expert on it, and you have something that you can teach to the public. And so people always ask me this question, well, how do I know if I'm an expert, or how do I know if I'm a thought leader? The moment you decide to say I'm an expert, or the moment you decide to say I can talk about this thing that I do every single day, then you are a leader. You don't need a fancy degree for it. You don't need any training, anything like that. For example, if you're selling your products on Shopify or something, and you are constantly putting them up there, constantly working with that, well, then you're an expert at Shopify. You're doing this every single day to make your business a success. And so you don't need kind of like a fancy credentialing. As long as you kind of know more information than the people that you're teaching, that's all that matters. But any type of expert advice always does really well for the media. And here are kind of the categories that that falls into. Offer something useful is what I would say for this category. Any type of life hacks, any type of things that you do that save you time that you feel like other people can benefit from. These are always really good. We're all trying to kind of come up with the easiest way to do things in the shortest amount of time. So if you have some kind of examples, then you can kind of let the media know that, you can talk about ways to save time on meal prep, or ways to, time block your calendar that saves you 30 minutes every day, or whatever it is. Anything that kind of saves time, simplifies your life, can be an email pitch to the media. The other thing is any type of strategies or tips. Maybe you have some leadership strategies, or maybe you have some sales strategies that you use. Whatever it is, you can kind of let the media know that you're available to talk about that or share your information. And the last thing is in this category is leadership advice. So anything that you're doing to kind of lead the team is really helpful. One example that I saw, I don't work with this company, but I saw some articles about him a lot, is the founder of Box, which is kind of a cloud-based file storing company similar to Dropbox. One time I read this article about him, and he actually has a Google Calendar that's just open to his whole entire team. It doesn't matter what position you are, but if you need a meeting with him and he's available on that day or time, everyone can kind of make an appointment with him. And so any type of fun stories like that always do well with the media. And again, it doesn't necessarily matter what kind of business you are, but you can let the media know. So the point of all of these things is that you always have something new to pitch the media. Like I mentioned kind of at the beginning of this section, where we're sort of talking about trends and trying to figure out how to fit our business into it, is that you can't just send out one pitch. So I can't just send out a pitch for Halloween today and be like, okay, that's it, I'm done. I'm not going to reach out again. And no, instead, I might send out the Halloween pitch this week if it makes sense for the brand I'm working with. And then next week, maybe, I don't really have a seasonal idea to pursue. So I'll pitch out some leadership advice from the CEO of the company. And so the goal is really to kind of always have something to pitch, because that's the only way that you're going to get media placements consistently, if that's something that you want. And so that's where that kind of what I recommended at the beginning of the presentation, that you spend about an hour a week doing this. That's where that comes into play. So, maybe this week you spend an hour pitching Halloween story ideas. The next week you spend an hour kind of pitching some life hacks. Maybe have some life hacks for other working moms out there. And then maybe the next week you only focus on your local media. You say, oh, I really would love to get kind of in some local Austin media, so let me only focus on that. And then the next week, you say, oh, I really have some good strategies for Q4. Let me write a pitch around that. So that's the way that I sort of recommend that you break it up, is that you always have something kind of new to pitch each week. And that kind of keeps it fresh for the media, because you don't want to keep pitching the same story idea and then someone's not interested and you just annoy them. But if you kind of are constantly coming up with these other angles, then you can pitch the same people over and over again, and it's not annoying because you're always offering something new. And so that's really the goal within this whole section, is to always have something to pitch, so you're really being consistent. I always say, for PR nowadays, the key is being consistent and agile. So you're consistently pitching new stories, and you're being agile from the sense of, okay, you sent out a pitch this week, you maybe got one response, you didn't get a ton of responses. Instead of kind of beating a dead horse, move on to something else. No one was interested in your Halloween pitch. Okay, well, let's see if we can come up with a pitch related to leadership advice. So you always wanted, like I said, consistency and being agile are the ways to kind of always get that media coverage for your business. So that's the end of section 1. Obviously, I'll take any questions that came through now. But here is all the ways to get in touch with me. If you have any questions and we don't answer them here, or you feel like they're very specific to your business, feel free to always email me. I'm always happy to kind of answer questions there. And then here's kind of my social media handles that I use the most. And I do constantly kind of share tips and advice and blog posts on PR. So you definitely, if you're interested in kind of learning more or really interested in seriously being your own publicist, I would recommend that you follow me there. So now I'll take any questions that you might have. I think we were asking them in the chat.
So what I'm requesting from everybody is, since this is somewhat of a small group, if you do have a question, you're more than welcome to take yourself off of mute and ask the question if that's a little bit easier than typing it. Mahani, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Hi, Rebecca. Hi, thank you, Francisca. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the next 3 classes. One question I have for you today is, what is your opinion about helping a reporter out?
I'm glad you asked. So actually, if you tune in 2 weeks, I have a whole section on that. I do think it's a really good resource for small business owners. And if you're not familiar, I don't want to dive in too much just because I do have a whole section of that in 2 weeks, but Help a Reporter Out is a service where you get emails throughout the day. They have a free and paid version where you get emails throughout the day that have reporter requests. So they'll say, oh, I'm working on holiday gift guides, or oh, I'm working on a story about mental health. Are you this expert? Can you comment? And you can sign up for the emails. Like I mentioned, free and paid version. I think the paid version, you just get a little bit before the free version, so you can kind of respond quicker, because obviously once the free version goes out, there's a lot of people responding, and so your email could get lost in the shuffle. But yes, I do really recommend using that if you're doing your own PR. And just kind of letting people know that you're available. Something else, I'll talk about this more in depth, but I also recommend that you use it to build your media list. So say, for example, you're kind of, let's just make this up, you can talk about the mental health, you can talk about mental health. If you see someone on there that's looking for experts to talk about mental health, definitely reply to them, let them know you're available, but then also add them to your media list that I'm gonna help you create next week, or not next week, in 2 weeks. Because chances are, they're looking for a mental health expert right now, but then they're going to be looking, again. So you want to make sure that they're getting all your pitches. So I do really recommend using that service, especially if you're doing your own PR. Have you been using it? Do you have any luck with it?
Yeah, I have used it. It takes a lot of time.
It does.
Like everything.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why it does take a lot of time. Something that I really recommend, because just for people who aren't familiar with Help a Reporter Out, or it's also called HARO for short, is that they'll ask the questions there. So, they'll say, I'm working on a story about female entrepreneurs and how you save time. Can you answer these questions? One thing I would recommend is you don't always have to answer all of them. Answer the questions that you feel most confident in, or you feel like you have the best insight. That would be the first thing. If they sometimes have a lot of questions, and you definitely don't have to answer all of them. And then the other thing is, again, add that person to your media list, so you're constantly pitching them. So then hopefully next time, maybe they, instead of going to HARO to find an expert, you're already on their radar, so they'll just reach out to you, and you already have that relationship. Because a lot of times with Help a Reporter Out, you do a lot of work, and because they're getting so many responses, you don't necessarily know if they're gonna use your responses or not. So that's why I do recommend you kind of add them to your media list, so then you can keep pitching them and get on their radar that way as well, not just through HARO.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I look forward to the next class.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mahani. If we have anybody else that has any questions, now's the time to go ahead and ask them. Again, if it's easier to ask it instead of type it, you're more than welcome to unmute yourself. As we wait, I do want to bring your attention. I went ahead and plugged in the link to our survey. If you could take about 1 to 2 minutes to complete that, we'd greatly appreciate that. And for any upcoming workshops that we have, I put the link right there. Rebecca's next one is going to be on September 24th. The next one we have lined up is going to be next week. It's for new Instagram features for business. So again, if you are looking at utilizing social media and Instagram may be new to you, that might be something you want to check out. Do we have any other questions before we go ahead and head out? I don't see any. Again, Rebecca, I want to thank you for today. Greatly appreciate it, all the resourceful information that you're able to provide us. And as far as everyone, please be safe, and we will see you on the 24th. Thank you.
Yes, that sounds good. And of course, if you think of any questions later, always feel free to email me. But it was so nice getting to do this, and thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
All right, bye.